Diplomats have been extraordinarily important in the founding and the prospering of our nation from the date of its founding. I mean, you wouldn't have had a Treaty of Paris without diplomats. You wouldn't have had the Marshall Plan without diplomats. You wouldn't have had a whole host of other things. You wouldn't have had a peaceful end to the Cold War, for one thing. I mean, the Cold War didn't have to end with a whimper. It could have ended with a bang, and it was the adroit practice of diplomacy that made it possible to succeed in all of those examples I just mentioned, and many, many others. I'll give you a couple of examples from my own experience as Secretary of State. While I tell people I was extraordinarily fortunate to serve when I did, because first of all, I was serving a president who understood foreign policy and had been engaged in it and practiced it himself, and had been a diplomat as our ambassador to the United Nations and our first representative to China. So President George H.W. Bush understood the importance and the nature and the nuances of the practice of diplomacy. During that 3 3/4 years, we were able to end wars in Central America through diplomatic means. Not a shot was fired. In those days, the wars in El Salvador and Nicaragua were the holy grail of the political left in the United States and the holy grail of the political right in the United States. But there were all these that came at it from 180-degree different positions. One of the first things we did in the Bush administration was diplomatic, and a negotiation not with a foreign power, but with the Congress of the United States to take those wars out of the domestic political context in the United States. Once we did that, it was easy to solve the other aspects of the problem. A more normal, I suppose, example of the practice of diplomacy back in those days was when we built an unprecedented international coalition to eject Iraq from Kuwait, practically every other country in the world. And we were then able to, in addition to that, get a resolution of the United Nations Security Council authorizing the use of force against a UN member state, Iraq, to eject them from Kuwait. That hasn't happened since then. Maybe won't happen for a long time. Hadn't really happened before that time, except in the case of Korea way back in the 50s when the Soviets walked out. And all of that was made possible through diplomacy. The Madrid Peace Conference, where for the first time ever Israel was brought to Israel and her Arab neighbors came to the table to discuss peace face to face. That was accomplished through diplomacy. The unification of Germany within a very narrow window of opportunity against the objections, frankly, initial objections of the Soviet Union, even our allies, Great Britain and France, was accomplished by the United States and the Federal Republic of Germany through diplomacy. Again, no military means used at all. Having said all that, of course, diplomacy is best practiced with a mailed fist. So if you have, I always found if you went into a meeting, a diplomatic meeting to negotiate something, if you had the 101st Airborne in your back pocket, you could generally accomplish a lot more than if you didn't. And so those are examples of things that were accomplished during my short 3 3/4 years here through the practice of diplomacy.